This video is going to look at how to checkmate in two or maybe three, maybe four, but two or three moves for the most part. And I'm going to go over a few board positions here. The first one is pretty clear that white has this game pretty much wrapped up in one. However, I want to talk about, a lot of students or players think that, hey, I think I will get my second queen here and we'll advance this pawn. And well, I mean technically yeah you can, but honestly to do that is showing maybe you could say no mercy, but it's also just showing the fact that you don't know how to win this game effectively. So let's take a look at how you can most readily win this game. I would say another move that someone would probably make right off the bat would be to make a queen takes g5, queen takes the pawn on g5, and that's what people see right away is, oh, let's get the queen, second queen, or let's take the pawn, it's free. And there's not anything, I can't say there's anything wrong. I mean, you're going to win the game, but realistically speaking, we should be able to find checkmate quicker than that without having to go through those moves there. So the whole idea here in this move is actually the pattern that I teach when you checkmate with just a queen a little bit. So you can checkmate in this board position actually a lot of different ways. You can checkmate actually in two moves technically. You could checkmate in three moves, but the most efficient way to checkmate in this board position would be to play the move that I would recommend people play if only the queen was on the board, and that would be queen to f6, keeping in mind the concept of the knight. If it were a knight, it'd be checking the king, and that's the square I like my queen on. So queen to f6 actually is the most effective way to finish this game. And the reason that it is the most effective way in this game, or I should say to finish this game off, is because once it's played, realize that the beauty of it is we have this bishop-queen line sitting here. And at the same time, well, if you look at what black's options are, black has only two move options actually for the entire rest or for this move right here. One option is to push their pawn. Well, if they push their pawn, then well, we get checkmate here. We play queen to g7 checkmate. It's guarded by the bishop. So black's only other move to consider would be to move the king over. But guess what? The queen to g7 is also checkmate. So it's kind of interesting to watch board positions maybe like this one. I'll move that pawn up there. Maybe like this one, where people readily want to just get another queen or take the free pawn, but they could just win the game in two moves if they'd like. And I think it's probably better just to show that, hey, I know I could have no mercy and take your pawn or get a queen, but really I know how to win this game in two moves anyway, so there's no point in doing that. I guess if you miss that move, then there are a few other options here that still lead to checkmate technically, but if you just maybe play your queen, I guess this would be a very similar position. Actually, it's going to end up with, you're actually going to end up with basically the same idea here. I guess you could play queen to e8. If you play queen to e8, and now taking a look at what the options are here for black, black's options are to either play the king forward, that's one option, but if you take a look at all these squares, cannot play here, cannot play here, cannot play here, cannot play here. So the king only has one square to go to. The only other option would be to move the pawn up. Well, regardless of what you do, I think this game is over in really two more moves if you play it correctly. So let's say they play the king up. If they play the king up, then we're starting to put ourselves in a position as we did before. This is a little bit tricky, but queen to f7. Queen to f7, once again, as I've discussed, it's kind of like a knight. We want that knight kind of position with the queen. And lo and behold, the king now has nowhere to go. As you could see here, the king is trapped. It cannot play here, cannot play here, cannot play here, and cannot play here. The queen has all those squares covered. So the only move for black is to basically push their pawn up 1. And once they do that, this game is over. And it's a kind of an interesting checkmate here, is you would want to realize that, again, that the queen, remember, has all these escape squares covered. They just have, the king has one way out. That's why the bishop f4 would be checkmate, because now the bishop is checking on that escape square that it had. The queen has everything covered, and that game is over. I'm going to move into a different board position here, and we'll take a look at a game that occurred actually here. It's the position that we were in this game. Now, this one I'd say is a little bit tricky here. So as we look through this position, we take a look at the black king, and let's just look at what issues it's dealing with. Okay, so the black king will not be able to escape to the f4 square because it is guarded by a pawn. Okay, currently the king cannot move to the h4 square because it is guarded by the knight. Okay, the knight has that guarded here. The king does have 2 squares to move to. Now, it could, or I should, yeah, 2 squares to move to. It would not be allowed to move to the, sorry about that, to the f6 square because that is guarded by the queen. So the only squares that it really has for options is the g6 square and the h5 square. Now, looking at all of that, it's kind of interesting how white may think that their best move is to capture the rook, and I would say that it's not a bad move, and by taking a rook for free, basically, that's not a bad move. You're going to get a free knight, and not only that, we should realize that this queen has a discovered check. That's pretty powerful. And actually, that's the foundation, or the whole idea behind how we can finish this game off the quickest, is to realize that there is a discovered check there. And when there's a discovered check, it's very important to take a look at where the piece that you're going to move, this knight, it's very important to take a look at where its options are. So I'm going to highlight these squares here that it could move to. The knight could take the rook. It could play here, here. This square is blocked by the pawn, so I won't highlight it. It could play here. Could play here, and could play there. So let's take a look at these options. I'm going to start with the not so good options, I guess. I would not take the pawn. It's not free, and I know there's a discovered check with the queen, but that king can simply just take your knight when you go there. So I am going to rule that one out. I don't think we should go there. I would say that the h4 square is not a good option because we're just sacrificing our knight. That is probably not the best option there, so I will remove that square. Now, I would really like to consider, now keep in mind, the king is in danger. Okay, we probably don't want to move our knight away, typically, from the attack, so to move it away from the attack generally is not the strongest move to consider. Now, I can't say never do it, but I'm going to remove those because I would like to keep my knight in the attack here. So it's very important to note. We are going to have a discovered check. When we have that discovered check, the king has options to play up, or I should say the g6 square, or to play down and back to the h4 square. It has no other options. So now we need to think about what's happening when we move our knight. To move our knight, if we were to take the rook, okay, again, not a horrible move, free rook, but the king playing to g6 actually starts to maybe, I don't know what I'd say, free up the king a little bit. By the way, king to h4 would be checkmate. I'll show that to you real quick. King to h4. Hey, we'd play our queen to h5. That would be checkmate because there's nowhere for this king to go. It cannot go there. It's blocked by the queen. It cannot play here, it's blocked by the rook, and it's all trapped in here by the queen. That would be checkmate. But you know, the king doesn't have to play h4. If the king plays to g6, we're going to have to sort out some other moves here. We should definitely still win the game, but there's not an immediate checkmate sitting on the board at this point in time. So I'm going to go back, and lo and behold, the interesting part of this is by playing the knight to g3, that's actually the fastest way to checkmate, and it's forced. So note this. We play that knight to g3. We've got a discovered check on the king, and now realize the king's two escape squares that we discussed before. They're actually both lead to checkmate. If the king plays to h4, then our queen is checkmate. It's checkmated because our knight is guarding the queen, and the knight is guarded by the pawn. So we've got our pieces all working together, and that's a forced checkmate. Now, if the king decides, hey, I see that they're going to checkmate me, and they change their mind, or they play up. They play to the g6 square. Well, lo and behold, that also leads to an immediate checkmate because of the queen f5 move. Notice that's a checkmate because the queen is checking the king. It is guarded by the knight. Not to mention, it has all the squares covered. And so that's checkmate. The king has nowhere to go. It's under attack. So sometimes, I'll go back to the opening position here. You know, don't always just grab a piece because it's free. Take some time to do some calculations and see if you can find that checkmate that's sitting on the board, or the win that's sitting there for you right now. Okay, I should go back here. This was the original position, so don't just grab the free piece all the time. See if you can find a better move. So I won't tell you don't take a free piece if it's there, but I will tell you if you think you have a good move in chess, always, always, always double check to see if you have better. The third position I'll look at is this one, where I'm going to just kind of wrap things up quickly in this video. This is a 3-move checkmate, and you can see here it's actually black's turn, so I'll flip the board. It is black's turn to move. There's actually 2 ways to do it, and I'm going to let you analyze one of them. I'll tell you that one way to do it is to play queen to f3 check. That is one way to do it. Now I'm going to look at a different method of checkmating here, because I'm looking at the bishop is attacking the queen, and the queen is attacking the queen. And so I'm going to say queen takes, queen check. The king only has one legal move, that's king to g2. Now, let's not forget we have other pieces, like a rook that could slide over here for a big attack. So I'm going to play rook to g8 check. The king has a couple of options. It could play to f3. It could play to h2. It could play to h3. Those are the only escape squares there for that king. And regardless of wherever it plays, we've got a checkmate on the board. So let me play it here. And the queen can play to f2 checkmate. If the king decides, hey, I can see there's issues on f3, so let me play here to h3, well, then we've got a good old fancy move called queen takes h1 checkmate. We could, if we don't like taking that piece, we could play queen to g3 checkmate. Okay, that would be another win. So if the king decides, hey, I'm not going to do that, I got to play over here. Well, guess what? We still got a checkmate here. We can play queen to h4 checkmate. And so there's just so many mates here on the board. Good luck on finding your checkmates on the board. Study, and always look for the best moves, even if you think you got something good. See if you've got anything better. Good luck.